All right, today we're going to talk about political business cycles. Now, political business cycles are a way of trying to explain the ups and downs of a normal economy. So, in order to understand political business cycles, we should probably talk just very briefly about what a business cycle actually is. A business cycle is a way to try to explain the economy and the ups and downs and just sort of give some names to what's going on in the course of, over the course of time. A business cycle is, well, it's easiest to show with a picture. It's a way of saying that over time, GDP goes up and down. And in the short term, we have these normal fluctuations in the economy. And so a business cycle model would look something like this, where we have ups and downs. So GDP goes up, it comes down, it goes up, it comes down. But what we should hopefully see is that over time, there's an upward trend. So the trend is the long run of GDP in your economy, and the ups and downs are the short run. The short run fluctuations that we've come to expect that we see in our economy. Now, within the scope of a business cycle, over time, what we see is that the business cycle itself does get some labels attached to it, so that we can sort of have we see a normal pattern. Now, the business cycle isn't a normal, consistent thing. I mean, there are ups and downs. We go up, we come down, we go up, we come down. But how long it takes us to go up and how long it takes us to come down isn't constant. That being said, let's break this business cycle down a little bit into its component parts. So, we start off with a business cycle. We're just going to go pretty simple here, and we'll look something like this. At the peak, or at the top of a business cycle, where GDP sort of maxes out, that's called the first phase of the business cycle, which is the peak. The only good thing about a peak is, well, the only bad thing about a peak, I should say, is that you only have one direction to go, and that's down. Once you hit the peak of the business cycle, once GDP maxes out, you fall off the edge. And as you're falling, what we see is you've moved into the second phase of the business cycle, and this is that dreaded word, recession. Once you hit the top of the business cycle and GDP starts to go down, you are then officially in a recession. Well, the recession, thankfully, doesn't last forever, and you get to the bottom of the hill, and that's called the trough. The only good thing about being in a trough is you only have one direction to go, and that's back up. So, as you head back up the hill, you are in what is called the economic recovery. And the recovery ends once you hit a peak. And those are the phases of the business cycle. The length of time it takes you to get from one peak to the next is the timing of the business cycle itself. And business cycles, as I mentioned, have different lengths of time. Sometimes the recessions are very shallow, sometimes they're very deep. Sometimes the trough lasts for a while, sometimes you barely even know you're in a trough until you're back into a recovery. So policymakers, if they're using a business cycle, and most policymakers do look at business cycles, have a hard time dealing with business cycles because they never know how long a recession is going to last, they never know how long a recovery is going to last, they never know when they're going to hit a peak until after all of this has happened. Now, let's get back to the idea of a political business cycle. This is a normal business cycle where the ups and downs of the economy happen on a regular basis. A political business cycle is a way to try to explain some of this ups and downs based upon policy. So what does that mean? Well, it means basically this, that if a political business cycle exists, we should expect that there are some, shall we say, manipulations that go on using policy to try to make the policy makers appear more competent than they perhaps really are. And so we see something like in the 1970s, 1972 in particular, the Nixon administration increased Social Security outlays, basically increased the Social Security payments made to seniors by 20%. The interesting thing about 1972, of course, is that it is an election year. And so if Nixon thinks he's at all in trouble about what's going on as far as his re-election is concerned. He wants to show people, hey, look at me. We can actually get things done. I'm a very, very competent leader. All you old people, you'll come out and vote for me now because I'm raising your Social Security payments. Now, the hope for this, and the way it ties back into our business cycle, is that this should increase consumption on the part of the senior citizens who now are flush with cash. It will increase government spending. And this should, hopefully, from the Nixon administration's perspective, this should increase economic growth. Now, it has the potential to also increase inflation, which you don't like, but hey, we'll settle for a little bit of inflation, which people don't usually see till way after the fact, to deal with some positive economic growth, some positive bump in the polls, and a nice walkover for Nixon in the '72 election. Now, there's always the morning after, once you've sort of experimented with this political business cycle. Hey, we're going to go spend money. Maybe it's not going to be so overt as increasing Social Security, but maybe we should cut people's taxes about 6 months before the election. Maybe we should increase government spending, say shovel-ready projects about 6 months before elections happen, so that, hey, look at how great we are as politicians. Look at the success we're having. Look at the way we're helping the economy. After the election, however, a lot of this positive bump that happens sort of peters out. So post-election, what we should see, and what we often do see, is that unemployment rates go up a little bit, growth comes down a little bit. So all this good stuff that was happening prior to the election, we revert back to the mean. And that's what we should see in a political business cycle. So if it actually exists, we should see some of that uptick in the business cycle happen right before elections, and we should see some of that downtick, that recession happen right after election, and then hopefully, for the politicians' sake, you get everything fixed before the next election. And then, the theory goes, the constituency, the voters, are so nearsighted that they say, oh, wow, everything was so bad, and it has nothing to do with the politicians. They've just been trying to fix everything. And so, look, they fixed things, let's vote for them again. That's the way the business cycle is supposed to work. And if you think about it that way, you got to think, how stupid really are the voters? Are they really that dumb to say, to look at what the administration is doing, to look at what Congress is doing, and say, why are they doing this, and why shouldn't we expect this big fall off after the election? That's sort of the curiosity of the political business cycle. Now, there's different kinds of political business cycles. We're going to get back to that, how stupid are the voters question here in a few minutes. But there are different kinds of business cycles. Just a typical fiscal policy political business cycle would look at cutting taxes and increasing government spending prior to an election. That's what you do on the fiscal policy side. Keynes, however, the Keynesian political business cycle focuses a lot more on monetary policy as well, where you try to get the Fed, or you try to get your central bank, to increase the amount of money in circulation, because that should increase economic growth. It should make all the numbers look better. Sure, that's going to lead to inflation, but we'll deal with that later. So there are different ways that political business cycles can actually be applied. So the question that we want to return to is then, okay, really, does this make any sense? Again, how stupid are the voters? Now, some interesting research has been done on this. Alberto Alesina in particular and Kenneth Rogoff have looked at these political business cycles in sort of gory detail. And they basically come to the conclusion that political business cycle isn't something that can be used to fool the constituency too often. Again, eventually they're going to catch on. And if nothing else, we should not expect these political maneuvers to lead to any real changes in the economy. They should all be inflationary. That being said, Rogoff in particular suggests that this political business cycle stuff might actually be a way for the politician to overcome a lot of white noise in the election, or more specifically, to illustrate to the constituents that there's all kinds of wrangling and hassle that goes on in the political process, but we can signal to you our competency through the mess. And so perhaps political business cycles are actually effective tools for disseminating information.